Sometimes you lose everything in a single night, and all you're left with is the choice to lie down or stand up. Abigail Tate chose to stand. After raiders burned her family's homestead and took everything she loved, she headed into the mountains with nothing but her father's old rifle and a heart full of grief. She learned to trap, to hunt, to survive alone. One cold evening, a black bear tried to take her fresh-killed rabbit. She stood her ground and faced him down. When Elias Boone, a quiet mountain man, heard about the woman who wouldn't back down from a bear, he rode into Silver Ridge to see for himself. What he found changed both their lives forever. Could two lonely souls, who'd forgotten how to trust, ever find home in each other? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Tate homestead had never been much to look at, but it had been home. Abigail remembered the way morning light would slant through the kitchen window, catching dust motes that danced like tiny stars. Her mother would hum while kneading bread, flour dusting her apron and her graying hair catching the sun just so. Her father would be outside already, tending the small herd of cattle they'd built up over 15 years of hard work and careful saving. Abby had been 23 that spring, old enough to know the value of what they'd built, young enough to believe it would last forever. She'd been courted twice by young men from Silver Ridge, but neither had stirred anything in her heart. Her mother had worried gently that Abby was too particular. Her father had just smiled and said the right man would come along when the time was right. The right man never came. Instead, the raiders did. It happened on a moonless night in late August. Abby had been in the barn checking on a cow ready to calve when she heard the first shouts. By the time she reached the house, flames were already climbing the walls. Her father stood in the doorway with his rifle, firing at shadows on horseback. Her mother's scream cut through the night, then stopped abruptly. Abby ran toward the house, but her father saw her. Even with smoke and chaos all around, he saw her. He shouted one word, "Run!" And then he was gone, swallowed by fire and smoke and the thunder of hooves. She ran. God help her, she ran. Into the dark hills, with nothing but the nightdress on her back and her father's Winchester that she'd grabbed from the barn. Behind her, the only home she'd ever known burned bright enough to turn night into day. When dawn came, she returned. The house was ash and blackened timber. The barn had collapsed. The cattle were gone, driven off or slaughtered. Her parents lay in the ruins, and Abby buried them with her bare hands in soil that still held warmth from the fire. She took 3 things from the ashes: her father's rifle, already in her possession, a tarnished silver locket from around her mother's neck containing tiny portraits of them both, and a resolve harder than the mountains themselves. Silver Ridge offered charity. The banker's wife brought a basket of food and offered Abby a room in their home. The Reverend spoke of God's mysterious ways and the church's willingness to help. Even Martha Hayes, who ran the general store and boarding house, offered work and a bed. Abby refused them all. She couldn't explain why, not in words that would make sense to people who'd never lost everything. But accepting charity felt like admitting defeat, like saying the raiders had won. So instead, she took to the mountains. The first weeks nearly killed her. She knew how to shoot. Her father had taught her well, but hunting for sport was different from hunting to survive. She wasted ammunition on missed shots, spooked game with clumsy stalking, went hungry more often than not. The mountain nights were cold, even in late summer, and she had only a thin blanket she'd bought with the last of her money. But Abby learned. She watched how animals moved, where they bedded down, what they feared. She learned to read tracks in soft earth, to move quietly through brush, to wait with patience she'd never known she possessed. She found a small cave, barely more than an overhang, and made it her shelter. She lined it with pine boughs and kept a small fire going at the entrance. She caught her first rabbit in a snare on the 9th day, and she wept with relief as she skinned it. The meat was tough and gamey, but it was hers. She'd earned it with her own hands, her own will to survive. Word filtered back to Silver Ridge that Abigail Tate had gone wild in the mountains. Some folks clucked their tongues and said it was a shame that grief had addled her mind. Others whispered that she'd always been a strange girl, too independent, too unwilling to accept a woman's proper place. Martha Hayes said nothing, but she left bundles at the trailhead where mountain paths met the road into town. Salt, coffee, a warm coat as autumn approached. Abby found them and took them without comment, her pride bending just enough to accept help that came without conditions or pity. The bear came in October, when the first snow was threatening and every creature in the mountains was desperate to fatten up for winter. Abby had killed a rabbit, a fat one, and was field dressing it by a creek when she felt the hair on her neck rise. Some instinct older than thought made her turn. The black bear stood 30 feet away, massive and shaggy with his winter coat coming in. He was easily 400 pounds, and his eyes were fixed on the rabbit in her hands. Bears were usually shy of humans, but this one was hungry, and that made him bold. Abby's rifle leaned against a tree 10 feet to her left. The bear was between her and the gun. Her knife was in her hand, slick with rabbit blood, utterly inadequate against a creature that could break her spine with one swipe of his paw. She did the only thing she could think of. She stood up slowly, making herself as large as possible, and she looked that bear straight in his small, dark eyes. Her heart hammered so hard she could hear it in her ears, but she didn't run. Running would trigger his chase instinct, and she'd be dead before she made 20 yards. "This is mine," she said, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her. "You'll have to kill me for it, and I promise you won't walk away whole." The bear huffed, a sound like steam from a kettle. He took a step forward. Abby took a step forward too, still holding the rabbit, her bloody knife raised. Everything in her screamed to run, but she planted her feet and stood her ground. They faced each other for what felt like hours, but was probably less than a minute. The bear huffed again, swung his massive head from side to side. Then, incredibly, he turned and lumbered away into the undergrowth. Abby's legs gave out. She sat down hard in the creek, cold water soaking through her worn trousers, and she laughed, a wild, breathless sound that was half sob. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold the knife, but she'd kept her rabbit, and she'd kept her life. And somehow that felt like winning. The story made it to Silver Ridge within days, growing with each telling. Some said she'd wrestled the bear. Others claimed she'd stared it down with witchcraft. A few said she'd screamed so loud and fierce that she'd scared the beast away. The truth was simpler and somehow more powerful. She'd been too stubborn to back down. Too determined to survive, to give up what was hers. Elias Boone heard the story in Martha's general store, where he'd come down from his high country cabin to stock up before winter closed the passes. He'd been living alone in the mountains for 5 years, trapping and hunting, speaking to another human, maybe once every few months. He preferred it that way. People were complicated. The mountains were honest. But when he heard about the woman who'd faced down a bear over a meal, something stirred in his chest, a feeling he'd thought died with his wife and infant son 5 years back. Curiosity, maybe, or recognition. Here was someone who understood what he understood, that survival wasn't pretty or noble, it was simply refusing to quit. "Where can I find her?" he asked Martha. Martha looked at him with knowing eyes. "You planning to bother that poor girl?" "No, ma'am," Elias said quietly. "Just want to meet someone who lives the way I do." Martha studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "She comes into town every week or so for supplies. Proud as a cat and twice as wary. You want to meet her, you best be patient." So Elias waited. He took a room at Martha's boarding house, endured the curious stares of townspeople who rarely saw him down from the high country. And 3 days later, on a cool morning with frost on the ground, Abigail Tate walked into Silver Ridge. She was smaller than he'd expected, barely 5'4", but she moved like someone who'd forgotten how to be afraid. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple braid. Her clothes were men's trousers and a wool shirt too large for her frame, and she carried her father's Winchester like it was part of her arm. Her face was sun-browned and dirt-streaked, but her eyes were clear and sharp. Elias watched from Martha's porch as the saloon keeper, a man named Porter, tried to offer Abby a plate of food. She refused with a curt shake of her head, her spine straight with pride, and Elias Boone, who hadn't felt drawn to another soul in 5 long years, felt something shift inside him. Here was someone who understood. Here was someone who'd looked loss in the face and chosen to keep walking. He stepped off the porch and started across the street toward her, his mind already forming the words that would change both their lives forever. Abby saw him coming before he reached her. Mountain men had a particular way of moving, economical, aware, like they carried the stillness of high places with them. This one was tall, maybe 6'2", with shoulders that spoke of years splitting wood and hauling game. His beard was neatly trimmed, his eyes a pale gray that seemed to see more than most folks. He stopped a respectful distance away, close enough to speak without shouting, far enough that she didn't feel crowded. That alone told her something about him. "Miss Tate," he said. His voice was quiet, rough from disuse, but steady. "Name's Elias Boone. I heard tell of what happened with that bear." Abby's jaw tightened. She was tired of being the town's cautionary tale or source of gossip. "If you came down here to gawk, you can save yourself the trouble." "No, ma'am." Something that might have been a smile touched his weathered face. "Came down because I wanted to meet someone who understands what it takes to survive up there." He gestured toward the mountains rising behind the town. "Most folks down here, they think the wilderness is something romantic. You and I know different." Abby studied him with the same careful attention she gave to animal tracks. His clothes were worn but well maintained. His boots were good leather, resoled more than once. The rifle slung across his back was a fine piece, clean and oiled. This wasn't a man playing at mountain life. This was someone who lived it. "You're the trapper from the high country," she said. It wasn't a question. She'd heard talk of Elias Boone, the man who lived alone above the tree line, who came down maybe 3 times a year and spoke to no one more than necessary. That's right. He reached into his coat and pulled out a simple wooden cup, hand-carved from a single piece of pine. He walked to the water trough, filled it from the pump and offered it to her. "You look thirsty." It was such a small gesture, but something about it caught Abby off guard. Not the offer of food she couldn't afford to accept, not charity wrapped in pity. Just water freely given, no strings attached. She took the cup and drank. The water was cold and clean, and she hadn't realized how parched she was. "Thank you," she said, handing it back. Elias nodded. "You faced a bear over a meal? Most men wouldn't face their own hunger. You're my kind of woman." The words hung in the air between them. Abby felt something shift in her chest, a sensation she couldn't quite name. Respect, maybe, or recognition of a kindred spirit. "I didn't have much choice," she said quietly. "There's always a choice," Elias replied. "You could have run, could have given up, or could have accepted charity and lived safe in town." His grey eyes held hers. "But you didn't. You chose to stand." Behind them, Abby heard the saloon doors swing open. Clem Hodges stumbled out, already drunk despite the early hour. He was a mean drunk, known for causing trouble, and his eyes fixed on Abby with an unpleasant gleam. "Well, if it ain't the wild woman," Clem slurred, weaving toward them. "Come down from your cave to beg for scraps?" He laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Or maybe you came looking for a real man to warm your bed." "I could." Elias moved. It wasn't dramatic or showy, just a simple step that placed him between Clem and Abby. He didn't say a word, didn't raise his voice or his hands. He just stood there, solid as the mountains themselves, and looked at Clem with eyes that had seen things die in the wilderness. Clem's words died in his throat. Whatever he saw in Elias's face made him take 2 steps back, hands raised. "Didn't mean nothing by it," he muttered. "Just having a bit of fun." "Fun's over," Elias said quietly. "Walk away." Clem walked away, but not before shooting a look of pure hatred over his shoulder. Abby filed that away in her mind. Clem Hodges was someone to watch. Elias turned back to her. "Apologies for that. I can handle men like Clem," Abby said, and she meant it. "She dealt with worse than a drunk bully." "I know you can," Elias said simply. "But you shouldn't have to. Not alone, anyway." There was something in the way he said it that made Abby's carefully constructed walls crack just a little. She'd been alone for months now, carrying everything by herself, and she hadn't realized how heavy that burden had become. "What do you want, Mr. Boone?" she asked, tired of dancing around whatever this conversation was really about. "Winter's coming," he said. "Bad one, if the signs are right. Animals are growing heavy coats early. Birds are flying south 2 weeks ahead of usual. Up high I can already feel it in the air." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Mountains no place to be alone when the deep cold comes. I'm proposing a partnership." Abby's instinct was to refuse immediately. She'd learned to depend on herself, to trust only her own capabilities. But survival required pragmatism, and Elias was right. Winter in the mountains alone could kill even experienced outdoorsmen. "What kind of partnership?" she asked cautiously. "Practical one," Elias said. "I've got a good cabin, well stocked, positioned to last out the worst weather. I know the land, the best trap lines where game winters. You're capable, quick to learn, and from what I hear, you can shoot straight." He met her eyes evenly. "Two people have better odds than one. We pool resources, share the work, both of us make it to spring alive. And what do you get out of it?" Abby asked bluntly. "Besides an extra pair of hands?" "Company," Elias said, and the simple honesty of it struck her. "I've been alone a long time, Miss Tate. So have you, from the look of things. Maybe we could both use someone who understands what that's like." Abby wanted to say yes. Every practical bone in her body knew this made sense. But accepting help, even help this reasonable, felt like admitting she couldn't make it on her own. "I need to think about it," she said finally. Elias nodded as if he'd expected that. "Fair enough. I'll be in town 3 more days, provisioning. If you decide you're interested, meet me at the North Trailhead at dawn on the 4th day. If you don't come, I'll understand. No hard feelings either way." He tipped his hat to her, a gesture that belonged to a more gracious time, and walked away toward Martha's general store. Abby watched him go, the wooden cup still in her hand. Martha appeared at her elbow like a ghost. "That's a good man," the older woman said quietly. "Lost his wife and baby 5 years back to fever. Took to the mountains after, and ain't hardly been the same since. But he's honest and decent, and he don't talk unless he's got something worth saying." Abby looked at Martha. "You think I should go with him?" "I think you'll freeze to death alone up there when January comes," Martha said bluntly. "And I think you've got too much life left in you to waste it on pride." She patted Abby's arm. "But it's your choice, girl. Just make sure you're choosing for the right reasons." That night, Abby sat by her small fire in the cave and thought about Elias Boone's offer. She thought about her parents, about the homestead that was nothing but ash now. She thought about facing that bear, about all the nights she'd been cold and hungry and alone, and she thought about Elias's eyes, how they'd held understanding without pity, respect without condescension. He'd called her his kind of woman, and something about that phrase kept echoing in her mind. 3 days later, Abby stood at the North Trailhead at dawn. She'd packed everything she owned, which fit into a single worn rucksack. Her father's rifle was slung across her back, her mother's locket hung around her neck, and her heart was hammering with a mixture of fear and something that might have been hope, when Elias appeared through the morning mist. Leading a pack horse loaded with supplies, she saw something flicker across his face. Relief, maybe, or pleasure. "Ready?" he asked. Abby took a breath, then nodded. "Ready!" They started up the mountain together, 2 wounded souls choosing to face winter side by side rather than alone. Neither knew it yet, but that choice would change everything. The trail climbed steadily through pine forest that smelled of resin and earth. Elias moved with the confident pace of someone who'd walked this path 1,000 times. But he kept glancing back to check on Abby. She appreciated that he didn't slow down for her, she could keep up just fine, but also that he was mindful of her presence. They didn't talk much during the climb. The silence between them wasn't awkward, just careful. 2 people learning each other's rhythms, measuring the space between them. It was nearly noon when they crested a ridge, and Abby got her first look at Elias's cabin. It sat in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines, positioned with its back to a rock face that would block the worst of the north wind. The structure was solidly built from hand-hewn logs, the chinking tight and well-maintained. A stone chimney rose from one end, and a small covered porch faced south to catch what winter sun there was. Nearby stood a sturdy shed for tools and storage, and beyond that, a lean-to shelter for the horse. You built this yourself? Abby asked. Mostly, Elias said, swinging down from his horse. Had some help with the heavy lifting 5 years back, but I've maintained it since. He didn't elaborate on who had helped, but Abby remembered what Martha had said about his wife and child. 5 years ago, before he'd lost them. Inside, the cabin was sparse but functional. One large room with a stone fireplace, a sturdy table with 2 chairs, a bed built into one corner, and shelves stocked with supplies. Dried herbs hung from the rafters. Furs lined the walls for extra insulation. Everything had its place, organized with the efficiency of someone who lived alone. There's a loft, Elias said, gesturing to a ladder leading up to a sleeping platform above. I built it for storage, but I can clear it out, make it comfortable for you. You'll have privacy. The fact that he'd thought of that without being asked said something about his character. Abby nodded her thanks. First things first, Elias said, pulling a leather-bound journal from a shelf. I want to show you my system. The journal was filled with sketches and notes, animal tracks, trap placements, weather patterns, game movement. Years of careful observation condensed into pages of practical knowledge. Elias's handwriting was small and precise, his drawings surprisingly detailed. I keep records of everything, he explained. Where the elk herd winters, when the creeks freeze, where the beaver build their dams. Mountains have patterns, same as anything else. Learn the patterns, and you can predict where to find game, where to set traps, when to hunker down and wait out storms. Abby leaned over the journal, studying a detailed map of the surrounding area. You've marked trap lines here, she said, tracing a route with her finger. But there's another set of tracks overlapping. These aren't yours. Elias looked at where she was pointing, then at her with new respect. You've got sharp eyes. Those are wolf tracks. Pack moved through about 2 weeks ago. I adjusted my line to avoid conflict. Smart, Abby said. Better to share the mountain than fight over it. Exactly. Elias closed the journal. Most folks come up here thinking they can dominate the wilderness. That's a quick way to die. Better to learn its ways, work with it rather than against it. They spent the afternoon organizing supplies and preparing for winter. Elias showed Abby where he kept everything. Ammunition in the dry box, preserved food in the cold cellar he dug into the hillside, medical supplies in a tin near the bed. He taught her his system for maintaining gear, checking trap lines, reading weather signs. Abby proved herself quickly. When Elias showed her a trap that needed repair, she spotted a flaw in the trigger mechanism he'd missed. When they walked the nearest trapline, she identified tracks from a fox that had been stealing bait. You learn all this from your father? Elias asked as they worked. Some, Abby said, resetting a snare with practiced hands. He taught me to shoot, to track, to respect the land. The rest I picked up these last months. Necessity is a thorough teacher. As the sun started to sink toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, they returned to the cabin. Elias built up the fire, while Abby unpacked her few belongings. The warmth spread through the room, pushing back the evening chill. I'll cook tonight, Elias said. Tomorrow we can trade off. I'm decent with game meat and beans, but I won't claim to be anything special. He was better than decent. The venison stew he prepared was seasoned with wild herbs and root vegetables from his stores, hearty and warming. They ate in comfortable silence, the kind that came from both being people who'd grown accustomed to solitude. After dinner, they sat by the fire. The wood crackled and popped, sending up occasional sparks. Outside, an owl called, its voice lonely in the darkness. Can I ask you something? Abby said quietly. Elias looked at her, his face half in shadow. Go ahead. Why did you really come looking for me? Partnership makes sense, but you've survived alone this long. You don't need me. Elias was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he spoke, his voice was low and careful. 5 years ago, I had a wife, Sarah. We had a baby boy, James. He was 3 months old. He paused, and Abby could see the pain etched in the lines of his face. Fever took them both inside a week. I buried them on a hillside overlooking a valley Sarah loved. Abby's throat tightened. She knew that kind of loss, the way it carved you hollow. After that, I couldn't stay in the settlements, Elias continued. Too many memories, too many people with pity in their eyes. So I came up here, built this place, told myself I was better off alone. He finally looked at her. But alone isn't the same as healed. It's just alone. When I heard about you, about what you'd lost, how you'd refused to give up, I recognized something. Someone else who'd chosen to keep walking even when walking hurt. Abby felt tears prick her eyes, but didn't let them fall. I dream about them sometimes, she admitted. My parents. I dream I'm running toward the house, but I never reach it in time. I always wake up right before... She stopped, unable to finish. I know, Elias said simply, and somehow those 2 words held more comfort than all the platitudes the townspeople had offered. He knew, he understood. He'd been there in that dark place where grief lived. Thank you, Abby said, for telling me. For understanding, Elias nodded. We've both got ghosts. Maybe up here, with honest work and good company, they'll rest a little easier. That night, Abby climbed to the loft Elias had prepared for her. He'd laid out thick furs and blankets, making it warm and comfortable. Through the small window, she could see stars scattered across the black sky like thrown diamonds. For the first time since the raid, Abby felt something other than raw survival instinct or burning grief. She felt tentatively like maybe she'd made the right choice, like maybe Elias Boone was someone she could trust. Downstairs, she could hear him banking the fire, his movements quiet and practiced. And as she drifted towards sleep, warm and fed and safer than she'd been in months, Abby realized something that both comforted and frightened her. She wasn't alone anymore. The next morning, she woke to the smell of coffee and wood smoke. Elias was already up, moving quietly around the cabin. When she climbed down the ladder, he handed her a tin cup of strong, hot coffee without a word. They ate a simple breakfast of fried cornmeal and dried apples, then headed out to check the trap lines. The morning air was crisp and cold, their breath making clouds. Frost glittered on every surface, and the forest was hushed, waiting. Elias showed Abby his routes, explaining his reasoning for each trap placement. She listened carefully, occasionally offering observations that made him pause and reconsider his approach. Twice they found traps sprung and empty. Something had stolen the bait. Fox, probably, Abby said, examining the tracks. Smart one, too. See how he approached from downwind. He knew the trap was there and worked around it. We'll need to adjust, Elias said, a note of respect in his voice. You're good at this. Had to be, Abby said simply. They worked together with an ease that surprised them both, falling into a rhythm as natural as breathing. When Abby's hands grew cold, Elias showed her how he kept a small fire-starting kit in his pocket, tinder and char cloth that could get a warming fire going in minutes. When they paused for a midday meal, they shared jerky and spoke little, comfortable in the mountain silence. As the sun began its descent, they returned to the cabin with 3 rabbits and a grouse. Good hunting! Enough to supplement their stores and keep them fed. That evening, after they'd cleaned and dressed the game, they sat by the fire again. This time, the silence between them felt different, less careful, more companionable. As if something had been established during the day's shared work, Elias pulled out his harmonica and played a slow, melancholic tune. Abby closed her eyes and listened, letting the music wash over her. It spoke of loneliness and longing, but also of endurance and quiet strength. When the song ended, Abby opened her eyes to find Elias watching her. "You have a good ear for music?" he asked. "My mother sang," Abby said softly. "Hymns mostly, folk songs. She had a beautiful voice. Sarah did too," Elias said. He looked down at the harmonica in his hands. This was hers, actually. She'd play in the evenings, and James would fall asleep to it. The sharing of that detail felt significant, like another small wall coming down between them. Outside, the wind picked up, sighing through the pines. Winter was coming, Abby could feel it in the air. But here, in this cabin with a fire warming the room and a man who understood loss sitting across from her, winter didn't seem quite so frightening. As she climbed to the loft that night, Abby touched her mother's locket and whispered a quiet prayer of thanks. Not for what she'd lost, that wound would never fully heal, but for what she'd found, a place to stand, a purpose to wake for, and maybe, just maybe, a person who saw her for who she truly was. 2 weeks passed, and autumn began its slow surrender to winter. The rhythm of mountain life became familiar. Wake before dawn, stoke the fire, coffee and simple breakfast, then out to check trap lines or hunt for fresh game. Midday brought a brief rest, perhaps a fire to warm cold hands, then more work until the light began to fail. Evenings were for preparing food, maintaining gear, and quiet hours by the fire. Abby found herself settling into this life more easily than she'd expected. There was something deeply satisfying about work that had clear purpose and immediate results. You set a trap properly, you caught game. You maintained your gear, it didn't fail when you needed it. The wilderness was harsh but honest. It never lied about what it demanded. She'd moved some of her gear to the shed, carving out a small space for her things. Elias had helped without being asked, building a shelf and hanging pegs for her coat and rifle. Small gestures that said she belonged here, that this was becoming her place too. They worked on winterizing both the cabin and the shed, checking every chink for gaps that would let in wind, reinforcing the roof against heavy snow, stacking firewood under cover until they had enough to last through the deepest cold. It was back-breaking work, but they fell into an easy partnership, anticipating each other's needs without much talk. One afternoon, while they were repairing a section of the cabin's north wall, their hands brushed as they both reached for the same tool. The touch was brief, accidental, but Abby felt it like a spark. She pulled back quickly, flustered by her own reaction. Elias didn't say anything, but she caught the way his jaw tightened, the slight pause before he picked up the tool and handed it to her. Something had shifted between them, subtle as smoke, but just as real. That evening, Abby caught Elias holding something small, wrapped in cloth. He was sitting by the fire, staring at it with an expression of such raw pain that she almost looked away. But something made her speak. "What is it?" she asked softly. Elias looked up, startled, as if he'd forgotten she was there. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then slowly, he unwrapped the cloth. Inside was a beaded bracelet, delicate and beautiful, the tiny beads forming a pattern of blue and white that might have been a stylized sky or water. The leather cord it was strung on had darkened with age. "Sarah made it," Elias said quietly. "She was good with her hands, could make beautiful things from almost nothing. She made this for me the month before James was born. Said it was to remind me that even when work took me away, I'd always have a piece of home with me." Abby's heart ached for him. "You've kept it all this time." "Couldn't bring myself to part with it," Elias admitted. "Some days it's a comfort. Other days it's like carrying a stone around my neck. But it's all I have left of her handiwork. Everything else burned when I torched our old cabin. Couldn't stand to see it empty." "I understand," Abby said, and she did. She touched her mother's locket at her throat. "Some things you hold on to because letting go feels like losing them all over again." Elias met her eyes across the fire. In that moment, they saw each other completely. Two people carrying their dead with them, unable to fully lay them down, but also unable to keep living under that weight forever. "Tell me about them," Abby said. "Your family," and Elias did. He told her about Sarah, how they'd met at a church social, how she'd laughed at his awkwardness and asked him to dance anyway, how she'd been the one to propose marriage, bold and sure, because she knew he'd spend months working up the courage otherwise, how she'd loved morning light and couldn't carry a tune but sang anyway, how she'd held their son with such fierce tenderness as if her love alone could keep him safe from the world. She was brave, Elias said. Even when the fever had her, even when she knew she was dying, she kept trying to comfort me. Last thing she said was, "Don't stay alone too long." I promised her I wouldn't, but then... He stopped, his voice catching. "Then I did anyway. Easier to keep promises to the dead than to myself." Abby felt tears tracking down her face. She let them fall, unashamed. "My father taught me everything about being strong," she said. "How to shoot, how to track, how to face fear without flinching. But my mother taught me everything about being good. How to be kind even when it's hard, how to find beauty in small things, how to love without holding back." Her voice broke. "They were the best people I knew, and they died screaming, and I couldn't save them. There it was. The guilt she'd been carrying like a physical weight. The knowledge that she'd run while they burned, that she'd saved herself while they died. You did what your father told you to do," Elias said firmly. "He gave his life to give you a chance at yours. That wasn't cowardice, Abby. That was his last gift to you. Wasting it by dying out here alone, that would be the real betrayal." Something broke open in Abby's chest. She'd been holding herself together through sheer will for months, but Elias's words found the crack in her armor. She bent forward, shoulders shaking with sobs. She'd been too proud and too afraid to release. Elias moved without thinking, crossing the small space between them and pulling her into his arms. He didn't offer empty comfort or tell her everything would be fine. He just held her while she grieved, one hand gentle on her back, letting her cry herself empty. When the storm finally passed, Abby pulled back, embarrassed. "I'm sorry, I don't apologize," Elias said quietly. "Grief is like a wild animal. You can cage it for a while, but eventually it breaks free. Better to let it out than let it eat you from the inside." Abby wiped her face with her sleeve, feeling raw and exhausted, but also somehow lighter. "Thank you. Nothing to thank me for." They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. Outside, an early snow had begun to fall, the first real snow of the season. Through the window, Abby could see fat flakes drifting down like pieces of torn cloud. "Storm's coming," Elias observed. "We'll be snowed in for a few days, most likely." Being trapped in close quarters with Elias shouldn't have made Abby's heart beat faster, but it did. She was acutely aware of him now, the quiet strength in his presence, the way his grey eyes seemed to see straight through her defenses, the unexpected gentleness in his rough hands. "I'll manage," she said. Trying for lightness, Elias smiled, a rare expression that transformed his weathered face. "I suspect you will." The snow fell steadily through the night and into the next day. By morning, drifts stood 2 feet high against the cabin walls, and the world beyond the windows was white and hushed. They were effectively isolated. No leaving, no checking trap lines, nothing to do but wait it out. Abby expected the forced proximity to be awkward, but it wasn't. They moved around each other easily in the small space, cooking together, mending gear, talking when the mood struck and falling silent when it didn't. Elias taught her to play simple tunes on Sarah's harmonica. Abby showed him a method of preserving meat her father had learned from a Shoshone trader. On the second day, while they were making repairs to leather straps that had grown brittle, Abby looked up to find Elias watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. When their eyes met, neither looked away immediately. "What?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Just thinking how strange it is," Elias said slowly. "Having someone here. Good strange, I mean. This cabin's been quiet too long." "I was thinking the same thing," Abby admitted. "About being alone. I thought I needed it after everything. But maybe what I really needed was someone who understood why I thought I needed it." The air between them felt charged, heavy, with things unsaid. Elias set down the leather he'd been working on and leaned forward slightly. "Abby," he said quietly. She knew what was coming, felt it in the tension singing through her body. Part of her wanted to flee to the loft, to safety, to the familiar loneliness that didn't demand anything of her heart. But a larger part wanted to stay, to let this moment happen, to see where it led. Elias reached out slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. His rough fingers brushed her cheek, gentle as falling snow. His eyes asked a question. Abby leaned in, her own hand coming up to rest against his chest. She could feel his heart beating, steady and strong. Their lips met softly, tentatively, two people who'd forgotten how to be tender, learning the language again. It was brief, chaste almost, but it sent warmth flooding through Abby's entire body. When they pulled apart, Elias rested his forehead against hers. Are you?" "I'm sure," Abby whispered, but also terrified. "Me too," Elias admitted. He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. "We can go slow, no rush." "We've got time," Abby nodded, grateful for his understanding. Whatever was building between them felt too important to hurry, too fragile to push. Better to let it grow naturally, like the trust they'd been building since that first day. The storm broke on the third day. They emerged to a world transformed by snow, everything softened and muffled and clean. The work of digging out and checking trap lines resumed, but something fundamental had changed. They'd crossed a threshold together, and there was no going back. Only forward, into whatever this strange and unexpected thing between them might become that night. As Abby lay in her loft, listening to Elias moving quietly below, she touched her mother's locket and allowed herself something she hadn't felt since the night of the fire: hope. Winter tightened its grip on the mountains. The snows came more frequently now, and the temperatures dropped until the mornings were so cold that water left in a cup overnight froze solid. Abby and Elias moved through their days with practiced efficiency, two parts of a well-oiled machine. But beneath the routine, something deeper was taking root. It showed itself in small ways. Elias making sure Abby's coffee was ready when she climbed down from the loft each morning. Abby checking his rifle and finding it cleaned and oiled, her way of taking care without making a fuss about it. The way their hands would linger when passing tools or bowls. How they'd begun sitting closer by the fire in the evenings, shoulders sometimes touching. They'd settled into an easy domesticity that felt both natural and miraculous. Abby cooked while Elias tended the fire. Elias mended clothes while Abby sharpened knives. They worked on their individual tasks, but always in the same space, as if being apart, even in different corners of the cabin, required more effort than it was worth. One evening, about a month after the first snow, Elias pulled out his harmonica and began to play. The tune was different this time, not melancholy, but something lighter, almost hopeful. Abby found herself humming along, then softly singing words her mother had taught her to a similar melody. When the song ended, Elias lowered the harmonica and looked at her with wonder. "You have a beautiful voice. Why haven't I heard you sing before?" Abby felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Haven't felt much like singing. Not since—" She stopped, but he understood. "Sing more," he said gently. "Please." So she did. She sang the old songs her mother had loved, hymns and folk ballads, songs about love and loss and endurance. Elias accompanied her on the harmonica when he knew the tunes, and when he didn't, he simply listened. It felt like reclaiming something she'd thought lost forever. Music and memory woven together, not painful anymore, but bittersweet and precious. Later, as they sat in comfortable silence, Elias said quietly, "You know what Sarah told me once? She said that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means learning to carry what you've lost, without letting it break you." He looked at Abby. "I think we're learning that, together." Abby nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She reached across the space between them and took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and sure. They sat like that until the fire burned low, just holding hands, neither needing words to express what they were feeling, but the peace couldn't last forever. It was early December when they first noticed signs of trouble. Traps had been disturbed, not by animals but by human hands. Bait was missing, and in one case, an entire trap had vanished. Could be someone lost, taking what they need to survive, Abby suggested as they examined the empty trap site. But Elias shook his head, jaw tight with anger. "Look at the tracks. These boots are good quality, not worn down." And they circled the area first, checking for witnesses. "This is theft, plain and simple." They found more evidence over the following days. A cache of dried meat they'd hidden was ransacked. Tracks led toward their cabin, then veered off as if the intruder had thought better of approaching directly. "We need to be careful," Elias said one night. "Whoever this is, they know we're here, and they're not shy about taking what's ours." Abby thought of Clem Hodges and his hateful glare. Could it be someone from Silver Ridge? Maybe. Elias loaded his rifle with methodical care. But that's a long way to come just to cause trouble. Has to be someone wintering nearby, or someone desperate enough that distance doesn't matter. They started taking turns on watch at night. It disrupted their routine and put both of them on edge. The easy peace of the cabin was replaced by tension and vigilance. 3 nights later, Abby woke to the sound of something moving outside. She grabbed her rifle and descended the ladder silently. Elias was already awake, crouched by the window with his own weapon. "Someone's at the shed," he whispered. They watched through the darkness as a figure moved clumsily through the snow, clearly drunk. When he stumbled into a patch of moonlight, Abby's blood ran cold. Clem Hodges. He was rummaging through their supplies, stuffing items into a sack with the careless entitlement of someone who thought he wouldn't get caught. "I'm going out there," Abby hissed. But Elias caught her arm. "Wait, let him take what he wants. We'll track him come morning, find where he's holed up. Better to know what we're dealing with before we confront him." It went against every instinct Abby had, but she recognized the wisdom in his words. They watched in silent fury as Clem stole food and supplies they'd worked hard to gather, then stumbled off into the darkness. At first light, they followed his tracks. He'd made no effort to hide his trail, confident in his own ability to evade consequences. The tracks led down the mountain, toward the lower valleys, then doubled back through a ravine Abby didn't recognize. "There," Elias said, pointing. Through the trees, they could make out a rough camp, a canvas shelter, and the remains of a fire. But Clem wasn't alone. 2 other men sat by the fire, one cleaning a rifle. Abby and Elias withdrew carefully. "Making sure they weren't seen. They're setting up a winter camp in our territory," Elias said once they were safely away. "That's not good. 3 men with guns and bad intentions, close enough to raid our supplies whenever they want. What do we do?" Abby asked. "We prepare," Elias said grimly. "And we wait. Men like that always make mistakes. When they do, we'll be ready." But that night, as they reinforced the cabin's door and checked their ammunition supplies, Abby couldn't shake a sense of foreboding. She'd seen what men like Clem could do. She'd seen it burn her life to ashes. She was sitting by the fire, lost in dark thoughts, when Elias knelt beside her chair. He took both her hands in his, waiting until she met his eyes. "I won't let what happened before happen again," he said quietly. "You're not alone in this, Abby. Whatever comes, we face it together. You understand?" Abby nodded, fighting tears. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "Not of dying. I've made my peace with that, but of losing this. Losing you. I've only just started to—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "I know," Elias said. He pulled her gently from the chair and into his arms, holding her close. "I'm afraid too. But fear is just a sign that we've found something worth protecting." They stood like that for a long moment, drawing strength from each other. When they finally pulled apart, Elias cupped her face in his hands. "I care about you," he said. "More than I thought I could care about anyone after Sarah. I need you to know that in case—" Abby stopped him with a kiss. This one wasn't tentative or questioning. It was fierce and sure, a claiming and a promise all at once. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, she said, "No, in case. We're going to survive this. And then we're going to keep surviving. Together." Elias smiled, the expression transforming his whole face. "Together," he agreed. That night they both slept fitfully, ears attuned to every sound outside. But when morning came and nothing had happened, they resumed their routine with grim determination. If men like Clem wanted a fight, they'd give them one. But it would be on their terms, in their territory, with all the advantages that knowledge and preparation could provide. Neither of them spoke of it, but both knew winter had just become about more than surviving the cold. The wolf pack appeared 2 days later. Abby spotted the tracks first, large paw prints in fresh snow, several sets moving together in a loose formation. She knelt to examine them more closely, her breath misting in the frigid air. "Elias," she called quietly. He came to her side, following her gaze to the tracks. His expression tightened. "Pack's bigger than before. 7, maybe 8 individuals, and they're hunting our trap lines," Abby added, pointing to where the tracks diverged, each wolf taking a different direction. "Smart. They're working together. Wolves normally avoided human territory, but a hard winter made all creatures desperate. The pack had likely exhausted easier hunting grounds and moved into the high country looking for any advantage. Over the next week, the wolves became bolder. They raided traps, scattered cache sites, even approached within sight of the cabin one twilight evening. Abby and Elias watched from the window as the pack moved through the trees like grey ghosts, their eyes catching the dying light. The alpha was unmistakable, a massive silver-grey male who moved with confidence that bordered on arrogance. He paused at the edge of the clearing, looking directly at the cabin, as if measuring what he saw there. "He knows we're here," Abby whispered. "And he's not afraid," Elias added grimly. "That's the dangerous part. They couldn't afford to lose more game to the wolves. Their winter stores depended on the trap lines producing consistently. But killing the pack wasn't an option either. It would be a waste of good animals and might draw more predators to the scent of blood. "We need to drive them off," Abby said. "Make them think this territory isn't worth the trouble." So they began a campaign of harassment. Whenever they checked trap lines, they made noise, fired shots in the air, left human scent everywhere. They hung strips of cloth soaked in kerosene around the perimeter of their territory. They played on the wolves' natural wariness of humans, trying to tip the balance from curiosity to caution. For a while, it seemed to work. The wolves moved their den site farther away, their tracks appearing less frequently near the cabin. But then Clem Hodges complicated everything. They were checking the southern trap line when they heard gunfire echoing through the mountains. Multiple shots, rapid and careless. Then silence. Abby and Elias exchanged a glance and moved toward the sound, rifles ready. They found Clem and his two companions in a small clearing, standing over the body of a wolf. It wasn't the alpha, but it was a large female, likely the pack's breeding mother. "Hell of a shot!" one of the men was saying. "Right through the eye." Clem laughed drunkenly. "Seen these bastards around. Figured their pelts might be worth something." Elias stepped into the clearing, and all three men spun toward him. "You just made a serious mistake," he said quietly. "That right?" Clem sneered. "Didn't see your name on this wolf, Boone." "The pack will come for revenge," Abby said, moving to stand beside Elias. "Wolves, remember. You've painted a target on yourself. Let 'em come," one of Clem's companions said. He was young, maybe 20, with a mean face and reckless eyes. "We'll kill the rest of 'em too." "And when they attack at night?" Elias asked. "When they catch one of you alone?" "Wolves are patient hunters. They can wait weeks for the right moment." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Clem's face. But his pride wouldn't let him back down. "We can handle some damn wolves. Better question is, what are you going to do about us being here?" The challenge hung in the air. This was it, the moment that would define how this winter played out. "You're stealing from our trap lines," Elias said evenly. "Taking food we work together. That stops now." Clem's hand moved toward his rifle, but Abby already had hers trained on him. "I wouldn't," she said calmly. "I don't miss." The tableau held for a long moment, 3 against 2. But Abby and Elias had the advantage of being sober, prepared and clear-eyed about what was at stake. Finally, Clem laughed, but it sounded forced. "Relax, we're just having some fun. Plenty of game for everyone, right?" "There would be if you hadn't just killed the wolves' breeding female," Elias said. "Now the pack will be dangerous to everything in this territory, including you." He turned and walked away, trusting Abby to cover their retreat. She backed up slowly, rifle still trained on the 3 men, then followed Elias into the trees. They heard Clem cursing behind them, but no shots were fired. Still, the confrontation had crossed a line. There would be consequences. "They're fools," Abby said once they were safely away. "Worse than fools," Elias replied. "They're desperate. That makes them unpredictable." That night they heard the wolves howling. The sound was mournful, full of grief and rage, the pack mourning their lost member. It raised the hair on Abby's neck. "They'll hunt Clem and his men," she said. "Maybe," Elias agreed. "And maybe anyone else they encounter." Wolves don't distinguish between humans when they're angry. As if to prove his point, they found tracks around the cabin the next morning. The entire pack had circled the clearing during the night, closer than they'd ever come before. A clear message. The truce was over. That evening, Elias was teaching Abby a complicated knot for securing game. When she looked up and caught him watching her with an expression of such open affection, that it made her breath catch. "What?" she asked, her fingers stilling on the rope. "Nothing," Elias said, but he was smiling. "Just thinking how different this winter is from the last 4. Having someone to talk to share meals with, to—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "To care about." I'd forgotten what that felt like. Abby set down the rope and moved closer to him. They were sitting on the floor by the fire, and the firelight painted warm shadows across his weathered face. "I haven't forgotten," she said quietly. "But I'd given up on ever feeling it again." Elias reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch gentle. "Abby Tate, you're the most remarkable woman I've ever known. Brave and strong and kind, even after everything that's tried to break you." "I'm not that remarkable," Abby protested, but Elias shook his head. "You faced down a bear for your supper. You survived alone in these mountains when most men would have died. And you opened your heart to trust again when every reason said you shouldn't." His grey eyes held hers. "That's not just remarkable. That's extraordinary." Abby felt tears prick her eyes. No one had ever seen her quite so clearly before. "You make me want to be brave," she admitted. "You make me want to keep choosing to stand up, even when it would be easier to just—" She didn't finish, but Elias understood. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. She rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "We're going to be all right," he murmured into her hair. "Whatever comes, wolves, weather, thieves, we're going to face it and we're going to survive. Promise?" Abby whispered. "Promise." They sat like that for a long time, holding each other in the firelight, while outside the wolves howled their grief to an indifferent moon. Neither of them saw the figure watching from the tree line, but if they had, they would have recognized the tarnished badge on his coat, Sheriff Tom Brennan, who'd come looking for the men he'd sent to cause trouble, and who now knew exactly where to find 2 people who'd become inconvenient to his plans. Morning came cold and clear. Abby woke to find Elias already up, standing at the window with his rifle in hand. The tension in his shoulders told her something was wrong before he spoke. "Tracks," he said quietly. "Someone was watching the cabin last night. Fresh prints in the snow. Stayed for an hour at least, then headed back down the mountain." Abby dressed quickly and joined him. Through the window, she could see the disturbed snow where someone had stood among the trees. The tracks were distinct. Not Clem's familiar shambling gait, but something more purposeful. Could it be one of Clem's companions? She asked. "Maybe," Elias said, but his voice was uncertain. "But look at the boots. These are good quality, well-maintained. Not the worn-down footwear Clem's crew was sporting." A chill that had nothing to do with the temperature ran down Abby's spine. Someone knew then. They tracked the prints as far as they dared, following them down through the pines until they reached a rocky outcrop where the trail disappeared. Whoever had been watching knew how to cover their tracks when they wanted to. Back at the cabin, they reinforced their defenses. Elias rigged a series of bells and tripwires around the perimeter. Nothing that would stop a determined intruder, but enough to give warning. Abby checked their ammunition supplies and made sure their rifles were loaded and ready. The unease sat heavy between them all day. They went through their usual routine, checking traps, gathering firewood, preparing meals, but both kept one eye on the trees, waiting for something to happen. It was mid-afternoon when they heard riders approaching. Not trying to be quiet, just coming straight up the trail with the confidence of people who expected no resistance. Abby and Elias positioned themselves on the porch, rifles held ready, but not raised. 3 horses emerged from the tree line, and Abby's heart sank when she saw who led them. Sheriff Tom Brennan sat astride a fine bay gelding, his tarnished badge catching the weak winter sun. With him were 2 deputies she didn't recognize, hard men with harder eyes. They reined in at the edge of the clearing, and Brennan's gaze swept over the cabin with the assessing look of someone cataloging weaknesses. "Mr. Boone," Brennan said, his voice carrying false friendliness. "Miss Tate, didn't expect to find you 2 keeping company up here." "Sheriff," Elias acknowledged, his tone neutral. "Long way to come in winter. Must be important. Got a report that some men went missing in these mountains," Brennan said. 3 fellows from Silver Ridge who came up to do some trapping. You wouldn't happen to have seen them?" "We've seen them," Abby said coldly. Clem Hodges and 2 others. They've been stealing from our trap lines. Brennan's expression hardened slightly. That's a serious accusation, Miss Tate. You have proof? Tracks, stolen goods, and our own eyes, Elias said. They've got a camp about 3 miles south of here, in the ravine near Twin Pines. If they're missing, that's where you should start looking. The sheriff exchanged glances with his deputies. Something in that look made Abby's instincts scream danger. These men hadn't come looking for Clem. They'd come for something else entirely. Appreciate the information, Brennan said. But instead of turning his horse, he dismounted. His deputies did the same. Mind if we warm up inside? It's a cold ride. Actually, we do mind, Abby said, her hand tightening on her rifle. You're welcome to the fire pit out here, but the cabin's private. Brennan's false friendliness evaporated. Now, Miss Tate, that's not very neighborly. Here I am, doing my duty, checking on citizens in my jurisdiction, and you're refusing basic hospitality. Your jurisdiction ends at the Silver Ridge town limits, Elias said quietly. Up here we govern ourselves, and we're telling you to state your business or move on. For a long moment, the 2 groups stared at each other, deadlock. Then Brennan smiled, but there was nothing warm in it. Fine, I'll be direct. You're squatting on valuable land up here, Boone. Land that rightfully belongs to various claims that have been, shall we say, vacated. Vacated, Abby repeated, her voice sharp. Like my family's homestead was vacated, after raiders burned it to the ground. Brennan's eyes narrowed. Careful, girl. You're treading on dangerous ground, and you're admitting to crimes, Elias cut in. What is this really about, Sheriff? Brennan dropped all pretense. It's about you 2 being in the way. There's silver in these mountains, more than you can imagine. Men with money and vision want to extract it. But they can't do that with homesteaders and squatters claiming the land. He gestured casually toward Abby. Your family's place, for instance. Sitting on one of the richest veins in the territory. Shame about that fire. The admission hit Abby like a physical blow. She'd suspected, but hearing it confirmed, that her parents had been murdered for what lay beneath their land, made rage bloom hot and fierce in her chest. You orchestrated it, she said, her voice shaking. The raids, the killings, all of it. You're not a lawman, you're a murderer. I'm a businessman, Brennan corrected. And right now, business requires you 2 to pack up and leave this mountain. Today. And if we refuse? Elias asked, though they all knew the answer. Brennan's hand moved to his gun. Then this becomes a tragic situation. 2 isolated homesteaders, caught in a harsh winter, found frozen come spring. Happens all the time up here. You'd murder us in cold blood? Abby asked. I'd resolve a problem, Brennan said. Just like I resolved the problem of your parents. Just like I'll resolve anyone else who gets in the way of progress. One of the deputies started to move forward, but Elias raised his rifle in one smooth motion. I wouldn't. We've got you covered, and at this range, I don't miss. Abby had her rifle up too, trained on Brennan. Her hands were steady, despite the fury coursing through her veins. Brennan laughed, but it sounded forced. You going to shoot a lawman? That's a hanging offense. So is murder, Elias said. And you just confessed to orchestrating raids that killed innocent families. I'd say we'd be well within our rights to defend ourselves. The standoff held, tension thick enough to choke on. Then Brennan held up his hands in mock surrender. All right, no need for anyone to do something stupid. He backed toward his horse. But you listen to me, both of you. This mountain ain't big enough for you to hide in. Come spring, when the snows melt, there'll be a reckoning, and next time I come, I won't bother with conversation. He mounted up, his deputies following suit. But before he rode off, he looked directly at Abby. Found your father's watch, by the way. Clem's been wearing it. Thought you'd want to know. It was deliberate cruelty, designed to hurt, and it worked. Abby felt tears burn her eyes, even as her finger tightened on the trigger. Elias's hand came down gently on her shoulder. Not now, he murmured. Not like this. Brennan wheeled his horse and rode off, his deputies following. They disappeared into the trees, but the threat they'd left behind hung heavy in the air. When they were gone, Abby's legs gave out. She sat down hard on the porch steps, her rifle clattering beside her. "My father's watch," she whispered. "Clem took it. He was there. He helped murder my parents." Elias sat beside her, pulling her into his arms. "We'll get it back," he promised, "and we'll make them answer for what they've done, all of them." But as they sat there in the cold afternoon light, both knew the same truth. They'd just become targets in a war they hadn't chosen, and winter had just become the least of their worries. They couldn't stay at the cabin. That much became clear within hours of Brennan's visit. If the corrupt sheriff knew where they were, he could return with more men, better prepared. The cabin was defensible, but not against a determined assault by armed deputies who didn't care about the law. But where could they go? "Silver Ridge," Elias said as they packed essential supplies by lamplight. "We need to take this public. Brennan's power depends on people not knowing what he's really doing. If we expose him in front of the whole town, they'll think we're crazy," Abby interrupted. "He's the law. We're just two people living in the mountains. Who's going to believe us?" "Someone will," Elias insisted. "Martha Hayes, for one. She's sharp, and she doesn't miss much. If there's evidence to be found, she'll know where to look." It was a desperate plan, but it was all they had. They loaded their horses with supplies, took one last look at the cabin that had become their refuge, and set out through the darkness. The ride down the mountain was treacherous. Snow had started falling again, heavy and thick, obscuring the trail. But both Abby and Elias knew these mountains well enough now to navigate by feel and instinct. They pushed through the night, knowing that speed was more important than caution. They reached Silver Ridge just after dawn, two exhausted riders on tired horses. The town was just waking, smoke rising from chimneys, a few early risers moving through the streets. They headed straight for Martha's boarding house. Martha took one look at them and ushered them inside without questions. She sat them down, poured hot coffee, and then said simply, "Tell me." So they did. Everything, the raids on the trap lines, the confrontation with Clem, Brennan's visit and his barely veiled threats, his admission about orchestrating the attacks on homesteads. When they finished, Martha was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood and walked to a cabinet in the corner. She pulled out a locked box, opened it with a key she wore around her neck, and removed a leather-bound ledger. "I've been keeping records," she said, setting the ledger on the table. "For 2 years now. Every suspicious land transaction, every homestead that got raided, every claim that mysteriously changed hands." She opened the book, revealing pages of meticulous notes. "I knew Brennan was dirty, just couldn't prove it alone." Abby stared at the ledger. Page after page of evidence, dates, names, amounts of money exchanged. "This is enough to hang him," Martha finished, "if we can get it to the territorial marshal. Problem is, Brennan controls all the communication lines out of Silver Ridge. Any telegram we send, he'll know about it." "Then we don't send a telegram," Elias said. "We ride to the territorial capital ourselves." "That's 2 weeks' travel in good weather," Martha pointed out. "In winter, through mountain passes, could take a month if you make it at all." "Do we have a choice?" Abby asked. The three of them sat in silence, considering their options. Outside, the town was coming fully awake. Through the window, Abby could see people going about their morning routines, the baker opening his shop, children heading to school, life continuing as if nothing was wrong. How many of them knew what Brennan was doing, how many were complicit, and how many were just afraid? "There might be another way," Martha said slowly. "There are other families, ones who lost their homesteads, who know what Brennan did, but were too scared to speak up. If we could gather them, present a united front, they'd be targets too," Elias said. "They're already targets," Martha countered. "They just don't know it yet. Brennan's not going to stop. He'll keep taking land, keep killing anyone who gets in the way until someone stands up to him." Abby thought about her parents, about all the other families whose lives had been destroyed. Martha's right. This is bigger than just us. If we run, if we try to handle it alone, we're just one more problem Brennan can eliminate quietly. But if we rally everyone he's hurt, make it public, make it impossible to ignore, Then we have a chance, Elias finished. He looked at Martha. How many families are we talking about? At least 8 that I know of for certain, Martha said. Maybe more if we count the ones who haven't reported anything out of fear. She pulled out a piece of paper and started writing names. Jacob and Ellen Porter lost their ranch to a mysterious fire last year. Sarah Chen's husband disappeared after refusing to sell their land. They ruled it an accident, but his body was never found. Daniel Frost had his teaching contract revoked, and his homestead seized for unpaid taxes he never actually owed. The list went on. Each name represented a tragedy, a life destroyed by Brennan's greed. By the time Martha finished, Abby was fighting tears of rage and sorrow. We find them, she said firmly. We bring them together, and we make Brennan answer for what he's done. Over the next 3 days, they worked in secret. Martha used her position as the town's boarding house keeper and general store owner to make discreet contact with the displaced families. Some had stayed in Silver Ridge, working whatever jobs they could find. Others had moved to neighboring towns or were living rough, too proud or too scared to ask for help. One by one, they came to Martha's back room. Each told their story. Each showed evidence of Brennan's corruption, falsified deeds, forged tax documents, witness statements that had been ignored. Jacob Porter, an old man with work-worn hands, broke down when describing how his wife Ellen had watched their ranch burn. "She ain't been right since," he said, voice shaking. "Wakes up screaming some nights, thinking she's back there." Sarah Chen, a young widow with 2 small children, showed them a letter her husband had written days before he disappeared. In it, he documented threats from Brennan's men, promises that if he didn't sell, he'd meet with an unfortunate accident. Daniel Frost, the former schoolteacher, had kept meticulous records of his financial situation, proving beyond doubt that the unpaid taxes used to seize his land were fabricated. Story after story, evidence after evidence. By the 3rd day, they had testimony from 8 families and documentation that painted an undeniable picture of systematic corruption and murder. But they also had a problem. "Brennan knows something's happening," Martha said on the evening of the 3rd day. "He's been asking questions, having his deputies watch the boarding house. We're running out of time." "Then we move tomorrow," Elias said. "Publicly. In front of the whole town. We present everything we've gathered and demand justice." "He'll try to stop us," Abby said. "Let him try," Daniel Frost said quietly. The schoolteacher had a core of steel beneath his mild manner. "I'm done being afraid." "We all are," the others nodded agreement. These were people who'd lost everything. They had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. That night, Abby lay awake in the small room Martha had given her. Through the thin walls, she could hear Elias in the next room, also restless. She thought about knocking on his door, seeking comfort in his presence, but something held her back. Tomorrow would be dangerous. Tomorrow might end with some or all of them dead. The thought of losing Elias, of losing this connection they'd built, was almost more than she could bear. But then she thought of her parents, of their faces in the locket she still wore. She thought of all the families Brennan had destroyed, and she knew that some fights were worth the risk. She must have dozed eventually, because she woke to Elias gently shaking her shoulder. Morning light filtered through the window, weak and grey. "It's time," he said quietly. Abby sat up, her hand instinctively reaching for the rifle she'd kept beside the bed. "I'm ready." Elias knelt beside her bed, his grey eyes serious. "Before we do this, I need to tell you something." "Elias, let me say it," he interrupted gently. He took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "These last months with you have been the best of my life since I lost Sarah. You've given me something I thought was gone forever: hope, purpose, the feeling that maybe tomorrow's worth seeing." He paused, struggling with emotion. "If something happens today, I need you to know. You changed my life, Abby Tate. You made me remember what it's like to be truly alive." Abby felt tears spill down her cheeks. She pulled him close, pressing her forehead to his. "Nothing's going to happen," she whispered fiercely. "We're going to survive this, both of us, and then we're going to build a life together. Do you hear me?" "I hear you," Elias said, and he kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they pulled apart, both were smiling despite the danger ahead. "Together," Abby said. "Together," Elias agreed. They joined the others downstairs. 8 families plus Martha plus themselves. 23 people total, all carrying evidence and testimony, all ready to face down a corrupt lawman and the system that protected him. As they walked through the streets of Silver Ridge toward the assay office where Brennan kept his false records, the town watched. Some people looked away, unwilling to get involved. Others watched with expressions of growing understanding, as if pieces were finally clicking into place. By the time they reached their destination, a crowd had formed. Curious onlookers, people drawn by the sense that something significant was happening, and then Sheriff Brennan appeared, flanked by his 6 deputies. He stood on the steps of the assay office, hand resting on his gun, face set in cold fury. "Well," he said, voice carrying across the gathered crowd, "looks like we got ourselves a situation." Abby stepped forward, Martha's ledger in her hands. Her voice rang clear and strong as she said, "Sheriff Tom Brennan, you stand accused of murder, conspiracy, theft, and corruption. We have evidence. We have witnesses. And we demand justice." The confrontation was on. The crowd pressed closer, sensing drama. Brennan's smile was predatory as he looked at the gathered families. "That's quite an accusation, Miss Tate," he said. "You got any proof to back up words that serious?" Abby held up the ledger. Detailed records of every illegal transaction. Names, dates, amounts. Witness testimony from 8 families whose lives you destroyed. And your own confession, which Elias and I both heard, about orchestrating the raids. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Brennan's expression hardened, but he kept his voice level. "Careful now. That sounds like conspiracy talk. The ravings of a troubled woman who lost her family and can't accept it was just bad luck. Bad luck." Jacob Porter stepped forward, his weathered face set in lines of fury. "Bad luck that my ranch burned the week after I refused to sell? Bad luck that the same men who threatened me were seen riding away from the flames? Bad luck that my husband disappeared after documenting your threats?" Sarah Chen added, her voice shaking but determined, "that his body was never found, but you immediately seized our land." One by one, the other families spoke up, their voices growing stronger as they found courage in each other. The crowd's murmurs grew louder. Doubt was spreading. Brennan held up his hands. "Now, folks, you know me. I've kept this town safe for 6 years. These people are upset, and I understand that. But they're confused. Grief does strange things to the mind. Show them the ledger," Elias said quietly to Martha. Martha stepped forward and opened the book, reading aloud. "October 15th, 1873, Tate Homestead. Payment received, $3,000 from Consolidated Mining. Raid executed November 2nd. Land claim filed November 4th, under name Thomas Brennan." She looked up. "That's you, Sheriff. And it's one entry of dozens." The crowd was silent now, hanging on every word. Faces showed shock, anger, disgust. Brennan's hand moved toward his gun. "That's a forgery. Everyone knows Martha's been touched in the head. The bank records match," Martha interrupted calmly.
"I checked.
"Every deposit, every transaction. It's all documented in the Silver Ridge National Bank, which you don't control. Anyone can verify it." Brennan's mask slipped. For a moment, pure rage showed on his face. Then he schooled his features back to control. "This is nonsense. I'm a lawman. You're criminals and malcontents. Deputies." He turned to his 6 armed men. "Arrest them. All of them." The deputies moved forward, hands on their weapons. But the crowd didn't part to let them through. Instead, people stood firm, blocking their path. "No," someone said. It was Tom Reed, the banker. "No, I want to hear more. I want to see that ledger." "Me too," added Sarah Mitchell, who ran the restaurant. "My cousin lost her homestead 2 years back. Same story, refused to sell, then tragedy struck." More voices joined in. The crowd was turning, and Brennan could see it. His hand dropped to his revolver. "This is your last chance," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Stand aside, or I'll consider you all in rebellion against lawful authority." "You're not lawful," Abby said clearly. "You're a murderer wearing a badge. And everyone here knows it now." Brennan drew his gun. Everything happened at once. People screamed and scattered. Elias moved in front of Abby, his rifle coming up. The deputies drew their weapons, spreading out in a practiced formation. For a heartbeat, violence seemed inevitable. A bloodbath in the streets of Silver Ridge. Then a voice rang out, calm and authoritative. Sheriff Brennan put the weapon down. Everyone froze. Riding into the square from the North Road came 4 men on horseback. A tall man in a long coat with a star pinned to his chest, flanked by 3 deputies wearing territorial marshal badges. Marshal Cole Harrison had arrived. Brennan's face went white. "Marshal, this is a local matter. I have it under control. Doesn't look like control from where I'm sitting," Harrison said, dismounting. He was in his 50s, weathered but sharp-eyed, with the bearing of a man who'd seen too much to be easily fooled. "Looks like you were about to shoot unarmed civilians. They're making false accusations." "I'll be the judge of that," Harrison interrupted. He walked forward, his deputies spreading out to cover the crowd. His eyes found Abby. "You the one who sent the telegram 3 days ago?" Abby blinked, confused. "I didn't send any telegram." "Someone did." Harrison pulled a folded paper from his coat. "Came into our office marked urgent. Claimed Sheriff Brennan was involved in murder and land fraud. Said evidence would be presented in Silver Ridge on this date." He looked at Elias. "You're Boone, the mountain man?" "I am," Elias said. "Telegram was signed with your name." Elias shook his head slowly. "I didn't send it. But I'm glad someone did. A mystery for later." Right now, Harrison was studying the gathered crowd, the families with their evidence, the guilty expression on Brennan's face. "Someone hand me that ledger," he said. Martha gave it to him. Harrison flipped through pages, his expression growing darker with each entry. He compared entries to documents the families provided. He questioned several people in the crowd about what they'd witnessed. Finally, he closed the book and looked at Brennan. "Sheriff, I'm placing you under arrest for suspicion of murder, fraud, and abuse of authority. Your deputies, too. You'll be taken to the territorial capital for trial." "You can't do this," Brennan snarled. "You have no jurisdiction here." "Territorial marshal supersedes county authority," Harrison said calmly, "especially in cases of corruption." "Boys!" he gestured to his deputies. "Disarm them." For a moment, Brennan looked like he might fight. His hand tightened on his gun, his eyes wild. Then slowly he saw the futility of it. Harrison's deputies had rifles trained on him. The crowd was hostile. His own deputies were looking uncertain, realizing they'd backed the wrong man. One by one, they surrendered their weapons. As Harrison's men clapped irons on Brennan and his corrupt deputies, the tension in the air broke. People began talking, exclaiming, some crying with relief. The families who'd lost everything embraced each other, tears flowing freely. Abby felt her knees go weak. Elias caught her, holding her steady. "It's over," he murmured. "It's really over." "Not quite," Harrison said, approaching them. "I'll need detailed statements from everyone. And someone needs to explain how a telegram got sent without anyone here knowing about it." But before they could respond, there was a commotion at the edge of the crowd. Someone was pushing through, shouting. Abby turned and saw Clem Hodges, wild-eyed and bloody, stumbling into the square. "Wolves!" he gasped. "The wolves! They killed my men, both of them, tore them apart. I barely—" He collapsed and people rushed to help him. Elias and Abby exchanged glances. The pack had taken its revenge, just as they'd warned. Nature had delivered its own justice. As the crowd dealt with Clem, Abby felt something hard pressing against her leg. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a pocket watch, her father's watch. She had no memory of putting it there, but there it was, ticking steadily. She opened it and found a note tucked inside, written in careful script. "Sometimes the dead can help the living, if the living are brave enough to stand." The telegram was sent. "Justice will come. Tell no one. Signed, a friend." Abby showed the note to Elias, who read it with wonder. They looked at each other, then around the square. But whoever their mysterious benefactor was, they'd vanished into the crowd or never been there at all. "A ghost," Abby whispered. "Or an angel," Elias said. "Does it matter?" She supposed it didn't. What mattered was that justice had come. Her parents' killers would face trial. The families Brennan had destroyed would get their land back, and she and Elias had survived to see it. Marshal Harrison spent the next hour taking statements and gathering evidence. The ledger, combined with the witness testimony and bank records, painted an undeniable picture of systematic corruption. Brennan would hang, and his deputies would face long prison sentences. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across Silver Ridge, Harrison pulled Abby and Elias aside. "You two did something brave today. Dangerous, but brave. This territory needs people like you." "We just wanted justice," Abby said simply. "Well, you got it." Harrison tipped his hat to them. "I'll be in touch. We'll need you both to testify at the trial. But for now, you're free to go. And Miss Tate," he paused, "I reviewed the claims on your family's land. They're all fraudulent. As far as the territory is concerned, that homestead is still yours." Abby felt tears spring to her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. After Harrison and his prisoners had left, the families gathered at Martha's boarding house for a meal. It was a celebration, but also a wake, honoring what had been lost, while looking forward to what might be rebuilt. Late in the evening, Abby and Elias slipped away. They walked through the quiet streets of Silver Ridge, hand in hand, neither speaking but both feeling the same thing: relief, exhaustion, and hope. "What now?" Abby finally asked. Elias stopped walking and turned to face her. "Now we go home. Back to the cabin for what's left of winter. And then, when spring comes..." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the beaded bracelet his wife had made, the one he'd shown Abby months ago. "Then we go to your family's land, and we rebuild. Together." He held out the bracelet. "Sarah told me not to stay alone too long. She'd want me to give this to someone who understood what it meant to lose everything and choose to keep living anyway. Someone brave and strong and kind. Someone like you." Abby took the bracelet with shaking hands. She understood what he was offering, not just the bracelet, but his heart, his future. A promise to build something new on the foundation of their shared grief. "Are you asking me?" she began. "I'm asking if you'll have me," Elias said simply. "If you'll let me stand beside you while we build a life. Not to replace what we lost, but to honor it by refusing to let it define us forever." Abby slipped the bracelet onto her wrist. Then she stood on her toes and kissed him, pouring everything she felt into that moment: gratitude, love, hope, determination. When they pulled apart, she said, "Yes to all of it, yes." They stood together under the stars, two wounded souls who'd found each other in the wilderness and chosen to keep choosing each other. No matter what came next, tomorrow they'd ride back to the mountains. But tonight, they simply held each other and felt the weight of justice finally served. Spring came slowly to the mountains that year, fighting winter for every inch of ground. But gradually the snow began to melt. Water ran in rivulets down rocky slopes. The first green shoots pushed through thawing earth. Birds returned from their southern migrations, filling the air with song. Abby and Elias had spent the remainder of winter at the cabin, but they'd spent that time preparing, planning, drawing sketches of the new homestead they'd build, talking late into the night about what they wanted their life together to look like. Marshal Harrison had sent word in late February. The trial was set for May, but the outcome was never in doubt. The evidence was overwhelming. Brennan and 4 of his deputies had been convicted of murder and sentenced to hang. The other 2 had been given life sentences in exchange for testimony. More importantly, the territorial government had begun investigating similar corruption in other counties. The case in Silver Ridge had exposed a network of fraud and violence throughout the region. Dozens of families were having their land claims restored. It was the first warm day of April when Abby and Elias rode down to what had been the Tate homestead. 3 months had passed since the confrontation in Silver Ridge, and the land had begun to heal. New grass was greening. Wildflowers were starting to bloom. The burned timbers of the old house and barn had weathered, becoming part of the landscape rather than an open wound. Abby dismounted and walked the perimeter of the property. Her parents were buried on a small rise, overlooking what had been her mother's garden. She'd placed simple wooden markers there, carved with their names and dates. "Hello, Ma." she said softly, kneeling at the graves. "Hello, Pa. I brought someone to meet you." Elias stood a respectful distance away, hat in his hands. Abby beckoned him closer. "This is Elias Boone," she told her parents' graves. "He's a good man, strong and kind and decent. I think you would have liked him, Pa. And Ma, you would have approved of how he treats me with respect and tenderness both." She touched her mother's marker. "I'm going to rebuild here. We both are. We're going to make this place whole again." Elias knelt beside her and added his own words. "Mr. and Mrs. Tate, I promise you I'll do right by your daughter. I'll protect her, support her, and love her for as long as I draw breath. And I'll help her honor your memory by making this land flourish again." They stayed for a while in silence, paying respects. Then they walked back down the hill and began the work of rebuilding. Word had spread through Silver Ridge about their plans. On the third day, wagons started arriving. Jacob and Ellen Porter brought lumber they'd been saving. Sarah Chen brought her 2 children and her late husband's tools. Daniel Frost brought his organizational skills and a willingness to work. Martha Hayes brought food and supplies, refusing payment. By the end of the week, 15 families had come to help. Some were those who'd stood with them against Brennan. Others were simply neighbors who believed in the old frontier tradition of barn raising, that when someone needed help rebuilding, you showed up with your hands ready to work. They started with the foundation, laying stones carefully, building something meant to last. Elias's experience as a builder showed in every measurement, every decision about placement and structure. Abby's determination drove them forward, even when the work was backbreaking and progress felt slow. The cabin began to take shape, larger than the original Tate house, but positioned on the same spot. It would have 2 rooms on the first floor and a sleeping loft above. A proper stone fireplace and chimney. Real glass windows, purchased with money Martha had been holding for Abby, the proceeds from selling furs and game over the winter. One afternoon, while Elias and the other men were raising the roof beams, Martha pulled Abby aside. "Got something for you," the older woman said. She handed Abby a wooden box. "Found this in the bank's storage. Belonged to your parents, papers and such. Thought you might want it. Inside were documents, the original deed to the land, a few letters, and a small leather pouch." Abby opened the pouch and found seeds, carefully saved, labeled in her mother's handwriting. Tomato, beans, squash, flowers. She was going to plant these come spring, Abby whispered, tears blurring her vision. "She told me about it that last morning. Said we'd have the prettiest garden in the valley." "Now you can," Martha said gently. "Plant them in her memory." So Abby did. While the men worked on the cabin, she prepared a garden plot near where her mother's had been. She worked the soil carefully, mixing in compost, creating rows. And as she planted each seed, she said a prayer for her parents, for all they'd lost, and for all they were building. Elias found her there at sunset, kneeling in the dirt, her hands black with earth. He sat beside her, and they watched the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. "It's going to be beautiful," he said. "It already is," Abby replied. Over the following weeks, the cabin took form. Walls went up. The roof was shingled. Interior walls were framed. By late May, it was habitable, rough still, but solid and weatherproof. The day before they planned to move in, Elias took Abby's hand and led her to the front of the new cabin. "Look," he said, pointing. Above the door, someone had carved a sign, "Tate Boone Homestead." Abby turned to him, tears streaming down her face. "You did this?" "Jacob helped," Elias admitted. "Wanted your name first. This was your family's land, your legacy. I'm just honored to share it," Abby threw her arms around him. "It's our legacy now." Us together, that evening they had a celebration. The families who'd helped with the building gathered for a meal, venison and vegetables, fresh bread, and even a cake Martha had baked. Children ran and played in the twilight. Adults sat around fires telling stories and making plans. Daniel Frost raised a cup. "To Abby and Elias," he said, "who stood up when others wouldn't, who reminded us all what courage looks like." "To Abby and Elias," the others echoed. Later, when the guests had departed and they were alone, Elias turned to Abby. "There's one more thing," he said. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket. I rode to Silver Ridge yesterday and spoke with Reverend Matthews. If you're willing, he'll marry us here on your family's land next Sunday. Abby looked at the marriage license, her hands shaking. Everything was moving so fast, and yet it also felt like they'd been building toward this moment since the day they met. I don't have a dress, she said, then laughed at herself. Of all the practical concerns, that's what she thought of. You could wear a feed sack and you'd be beautiful, Elias said seriously. But Martha mentioned she has her daughter's wedding dress stored away. If you wanted, yes, Abby interrupted. Yes to all of it. Yes to marrying you, yes to building this life, yes to everything. Elias pulled her close and kissed her, slow and sweet and full of promise. When they pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers. I never thought I'd feel this way again, he admitted. Happy, hopeful, like the future was something to look forward to instead of just survive. Me either, Abby whispered. But here we are, he agreed. The following Sunday dawned clear and warm. Wildflowers bloomed across the meadow, and the garden Abby had planted was beginning to show tiny green shoots. The new cabin stood solid and true, smoke rising from its chimney where Martha and Sarah were preparing food. Abby dressed in the borrowed wedding dress, simple white cotton with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. Martha had altered it to fit, and it was perfect. She wore her mother's locket and the beaded bracelet Elias had given her. Her hair was braided with wildflowers woven through it. When she stepped outside, Elias was waiting, wearing his best clothes, clean trousers, a pressed shirt, a vest Jacob had loaned him. But it was the expression on his face that took her breath away, pure wonder and joy and love. The ceremony was simple. Reverend Matthews spoke about loss and healing, about building new lives from the ashes of old ones. He talked about courage and partnership and love that endures. When it came time for vows, Elias spoke first. Abby Tate, you are the bravest person I've ever known. You faced a bear for your supper when most folks would have run. You stood up against corruption when it would have been easier to stay silent. You opened your heart to love again when you had every reason to keep it closed. His voice broke slightly. You gave me back my life. And I promise to spend every day I have left trying to be worthy of that gift. I will stand beside you, support you, protect you, and love you until my last breath. Abby could barely see through her tears, but she managed to speak. Elias Boone, you saw me at my lowest and never looked away. You treated me like an equal when others saw only a broken girl. You taught me that being strong doesn't mean being alone. She squeezed his hands. You gave me back my hope. And I promise to build a life with you, a good life full of love and laughter and honest work. I will stand beside you through whatever comes, in good times and hard ones, until the end of my days. Reverend Matthews smiled. Then by the authority vested in me by the territory, I pronounce you husband and wife. Elias, you may kiss your bride. And he did, to the cheers and applause of everyone gathered. When they broke apart, both were grinning through tears. The celebration that followed lasted into the evening. There was food and music, dancing and storytelling. Ellen Porter played fiddle while others danced. Children chased each other through the meadow. Adults raised toasts and shared memories. As the sun set and stars began to appear, Abby and Elias stood together at the edge of the gathering, watching their friends and neighbors celebrate. This is what it's about, isn't it? Abby said softly. Not the land or the cabin or any of the physical things. It's about the people, the connections, the community, and the love, Elias added, pulling her close. Most of all, the love. They looked back at the cabin, their cabin now legally and in every way that mattered. Light glowed warm in the windows. Smoke rose from the chimney. It was solid and real, a testimony to what could be built when people came together. Welcome home, Mrs. Boone, Elias said. Abby smiled. Welcome home, Mr. Boone. And there, under the vast Montana sky, surrounded by friends and standing on land, soaked in both tragedy and hope, two people who'd lost everything began their new life together, not by forgetting the past, but by honoring it and choosing to build something beautiful in spite of it. The mountains stood eternal behind them, silent witnesses to a love forged in hardship and sealed in hope. Two wounded souls had found each other in the wilderness, and together they'd found the strength not just to survive, but to truly live. And that, Abby thought as she rested her head against Elias's chest and felt his arms tighten around her, was the greatest victory of all. 3 months had passed since the wedding, and summer had settled over the homestead like a blessing. The garden Abby had planted from her mother's seeds had flourished beyond expectation. Tomatoes hung heavy on their vines. Bean plants climbed sturdy poles. Squash sprawled across the ground, their broad leaves shading the earth. And everywhere, in borders around the vegetables, in patches by the cabin, along the fence line, flowers bloomed in riots of color. Abby stood in the garden early one morning, watching the sun rise over the eastern mountains. She wore a simple dress, her hair tied back with a ribbon, her hands already dirty from pulling weeds. This time of day was her favorite, when the world was quiet and cool, when dew sparkled on every leaf, when she could think and breathe and simply be. Behind her, the cabin door opened, and Elias emerged, 2 tin cups of coffee in his hands. He'd become accustomed to finding her in the garden these mornings. It was her ritual, her way of connecting with her mother's memory while tending to new life. "You're up early," he said, handing her a cup. "Couldn't sleep," Abby admitted. "Too much to think about. Good thinking or worry thinking?" Elias asked, settling beside her on the garden bench he'd built. "Both," Abby said. She gestured to the garden, the cabin, the land stretching around them. "Sometimes I can't believe this is real, that we actually did it, rebuilt everything, made it better than it was before. Other times I'm terrified something will happen to take it all away again." Elias understood. They'd both lived through loss so profound it had reshaped them. The fear of losing again never fully disappeared. It just became something you learned to live with, like an old injury that ached when storms came. "Nothing's guaranteed," he said honestly. "Bad things can happen to good people. We both know that better than most." He took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "But we also know we're stronger together than apart. Whatever comes, we'll face it the way we've faced everything else, standing up, not backing down." Abby squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his steady presence. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you too," Elias replied. They sat in comfortable silence, drinking their coffee and watching the day begin. In the distance, they could hear cattle lowing, the small herd they'd started building. Closer, chickens clucked and scratched in their coop. A horse whinnied from the corral. The homestead was alive again, thriving. It wasn't just a place of survival anymore, it was a home. Later that morning, they rode into Silver Ridge for supplies. The town had changed in the months since Brennan's arrest. A new sheriff had been appointed, a good man named William Cross, who actually cared about justice. Several businesses that had been struggling under Brennan's corrupt taxation were flourishing. The families who'd reclaimed their land were rebuilding, and a sense of hope had replaced the fearful atmosphere that had pervaded everything before. Martha greeted them at the general store with her usual efficiency and warmth. "Got a letter for you," she said, handing Elias an envelope. "Came in yesterday's post." Elias opened it and read quickly, his expression shifting from curiosity to surprise to something Abby couldn't quite identify. "What is it?" she asked. "It's from Marshal Harrison," Elias said slowly. "He's been appointed to a new position, head of territorial law enforcement reform. He's asking if I'd consider working as a consultant, helping train new sheriffs and marshals in proper procedures and ethics." That's wonderful," Abby said, though her heart clenched slightly at the thought of Elias leaving for extended periods. But Elias was shaking his head. "I already know my answer, no." "Why not?" Abby asked. "It's important work and you'd be good at it, because my place is here," Elias said firmly. "With you, building our life. I spent 5 years alone in those mountains, and I'm not spending another day away from you unless absolutely necessary." Abby felt warmth flood through her chest. "You could do both," she suggested. "Take on a few assignments, teach some workshops. Come home between them. I'd manage fine on my own. I did before. But you shouldn't have to," Elias countered. "And neither should I." They discussed it more over lunch at Sarah Chen's restaurant. She'd reopened with money. from selling her reclaimed land, and was making a good living feeding hungry townsfolk and travelers. Eventually, they reached a compromise. Elias would take on occasional consulting work, but never for more than a week at a time, and never during critical farming seasons. As they rode home that afternoon, Abby felt content. This was partnership, compromise, and communication, supporting each other's growth while maintaining the foundation they'd built together. The summer passed in a rhythm of work and reward. They harvested their first crops and sold the surplus in town. They added to their cattle herd and began breeding horses. Elias took 2 short trips to help train new lawmen, and each time he returned, Abby met him with relief and joy. Other families visited regularly. Jacob and Ellen Porter had fully rebuilt their ranch and often hosted community gatherings. Sarah Chen's children treated Abby and Elias like favorite aunt and uncle. Daniel Frost had started teaching again, this time in a school the community had built together. The frontier was still hard, still unforgiving at times, but it was no longer lonely. They'd built something more than just individual homesteads. They'd built a community based on mutual support and honest dealing. One evening in late August, Abby was canning tomatoes when she felt Elias's hands on her shoulders. She leaned back against him, comfortable and easy in his presence. "I have news," she said, her heart fluttering with nervous excitement. "Good news." "I hope," Elias said. "I think so." Abby turned to face him. "I'm pregnant." For a moment, Elias simply stared at her. Then his face transformed, joy and wonder and a flicker of fear all mixed together. "Are you sure?" "As sure as I can be. I went to see Doc Morrison in town yesterday. He confirmed it. We're going to have a baby, Elias, probably in early spring." Elias pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could feel his heart racing against her chest. When he pulled back, there were tears on his weathered cheeks. "I'm terrified," he admitted. "After what happened with Sarah and James, I know," Abby said gently. "I'm scared too. But Doc Morrison says I'm healthy and strong, and we're not facing this alone. We have friends, community, help when we need it." Elias nodded, wiping his eyes. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "Our baby." He placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "I promise to protect you both, to be the best father I can be." Abby kissed him, stopping the flow of promises. "I know," she said when they parted. "I know you will, because that's who you are." That night they lay in bed talking about the future, names they liked, whether they'd need to add onto the cabin, how to prepare for a baby in a frontier homestead. They spoke of hopes and fears, dreams and practical considerations. "Your parents would be proud," Elias said softly, "of everything you've built, everything you've become." Abby touched her mother's locket, which she still wore every day. "I hope so. I hope they can see somehow that their death wasn't the end of the story, that something good came after, something beautiful came after," Elias corrected. He pulled her close, his hand resting protectively over where their child grew. "And it's only the beginning." As Abby drifted towards sleep, safe and loved and hopeful, she thought about that night so long ago when she'd lost everything, how she'd stood at the ashes of her life and chosen to keep walking. She thought about facing that bear, about refusing to back down even when every instinct screamed at her to run. She thought about Elias riding into Silver Ridge, looking for someone who understood what it took to survive. How he'd seen her, really seen her, when others saw only a wild woman who'd lost her way. She thought about the hard work of rebuilding, the courage of standing against corruption, the slow, steady building of trust and love, and she realized that her mother had been right about so many things. That beauty could be found in small moments, that kindness mattered even when it was hard. That love, real love, wasn't about grand gestures. It was about choosing each other every day in 1,000 small ways. The wilderness had taken so much from her, but it had also given her something precious, the knowledge that she was strong enough to survive anything. And more importantly, the wisdom to know that surviving alone wasn't the same as truly living. She'd learned to live again, to hope again, to love again. And that, she thought as sleep finally claimed her, was the greatest gift of all. Outside, the mountains stood silent under the stars. keeping watch over a homestead rebuilt from ashes, over two people who'd found each other in their darkest moments, over a life that promised more joy than sorrow, more connection than loneliness, more love than loss. The story that had begun with destruction had transformed into something beautiful, a testament to resilience, courage, and the power of two hearts choosing to heal together. And in the spring, when their child was born healthy and strong, when Abby held her daughter for the first time and saw Elias's face shine with wonder and relief, she named her Hope, because that was what they'd found in each other, and what they would pass on to the next generation. The unshakable belief that even after the darkest night, morning comes. Even after the greatest loss, life continues. And even when you think you've lost everything, you might just find something worth more than anything you had before. The mountains had witnessed it all, the tragedy and the triumph, the loss and the rebuilding, the despair and the hope. And they would continue to stand there, eternal and unchanging, while generations of Tate Boones lived and loved and built their lives in the shadow of those peaks. Some stories end in tragedy. Some end in triumph. This one ended in both, acknowledging what was lost while celebrating what was found. And in that balance between grief and gratitude, between remembering and moving forward, Abby and Elias found something that sustained them through all the years that followed. The knowledge that they had chosen each other, had chosen love, had chosen to stand up and face life rather than let it break them. And that choice, renewed each day in words and actions both large and small, made all the difference. In the end, that was the story people told, not just about a woman who faced a bear or a man who saw home in her courage, but about two wounded souls who found each other in the wilderness and built something beautiful from the ashes of their pain. A story about resilience, about courage, about hope, and most of all, about love. The kind that endures through hardship and thrives in adversity. The kind that doesn't erase the past, but honors it while building toward the future. The kind of love that transforms survival into something more, into a life fully lived, fully felt, fully embraced. And as the years passed and their family grew, as the homestead flourished and the community strengthened, Abby would sometimes stand in her garden, groan, now beyond anything her mother could have imagined, and whisper thanks to the woman who'd taught her how to plant seeds and nurture growth. And she'd think about that night she'd faced the bear, about standing her ground when running would have been easier, and she'd smile, knowing that the same stubborn courage that had saved her life had also led her to Elias, to this life, to everything that mattered. She'd been her kind of woman all along. She just needed someone to see it, and in seeing it, he'd helped her see it too. That was the gift they'd given each other, not rescue but recognition, not salvation but solidarity, not completion but companionship in the truest sense. Two whole people choosing to walk together through whatever came, and that, in the end, was enough. More than enough. It was everything.